Finally, I've been waiting probably 2 or 3 months for this event. I can't think of a better way to start the sales season than with our guest speaker today. I'm sure he has a lot of fans out there, and you can include me on that list. There's many reasons I'm a fan, but to list a few, he has served our great country immensely during his career in the U.S. Navy. And second, he was able to have the vision to take everything he learned during his time as a U.S. Navy SEAL and gift that to everybody in the form of podcasts, books, and of course his current company, Echelon Front. It is my great honor and privilege to introduce our guest speaker for the next hour, Jocko Willink.
Hey, thanks, Joe. Appreciate it. Glad to be here. Glad to be talking to y'all. And, I'm going to go back to the beginning a little bit. We jump right into what my career looked like towards the end. But the beginning of my career started off like a lot of people that joined the Navy, a lot of people that joined the Navy to be in the SEAL teams. And in order to be in the SEAL teams, obviously what you have to do is you have to make it through the basic SEAL training course. And the basic SEAL training course is pretty infamous for making people quit. There's about 80% attrition rate. So 80% of the people that show up there don't make it. And it's an interesting place because no one really knows who's going to make it through. And people often ask me, what's the most important characteristic for somebody to have, or what's the secret to getting through BUDS? Well, which is the name of our basic SEAL training, basic underwater demolition SEAL training, BUDS for short. So in my BUDS class, there was some guys that really stood out to me, of guys that maybe I should try and stick close to, maybe some guys I could learn something from, maybe some guys that would have some strong mental fortitude that I could kind of look at. One of them was an NCAA water polo player, and he had been the captain of an NCAA championship water polo team. So this guy was, a super stud. One of the other guys that I thought maybe I could learn something from was an Olympic gymnastics alternate. So he could, do all those crazy things. He could do an iron cross. He could do probably 70 pull-ups. I mean, he was just a total physical specimen. And both of these guys, I thought to myself, these guys are incredible athletes. And me personally, I was like an average or maybe slightly below average high school athlete. I definitely wasn't the smartest guy, wasn't the strongest guy, wasn't the fastest guy. And so I thought, I need to pay attention to some guys that maybe have some assets that I don't have. Well, as it turns out, both those guys, the NCAA water polo team captain and the Olympic gymnastics alternate, as it turned out, both of those guys quit. They both quit. They both quit basic SEAL training. And here I was, like I said, an average high school athlete, and I was able to get through the training. Why is that? I can tell you very simply why that is. I didn't quit. When things got hard, when I was tired, when I was exhausted, when I was cold, when my head was getting scraped by these boats that we're carrying around, I didn't quit. I picked up the boat, put it on my head, and kept going forward. Now, when I graduated from basic SEAL training, you feel like you did something pretty good. And I checked into a place called SEAL Team 1 in Coronado, California. And when I checked into SEAL Team 1, there was a few of us that went to go and check in with the Master Chief. I don't know that term's a little more popular now, but the Master Chief is the senior enlisted guy at the SEAL team. This is a guy, for us, it was a guy that had fought in Vietnam. He was a salty warrior. And when I was with a couple other guys and we checked in with him, and the first thing he said, and again, I graduated from basic SEAL training, and then I went to airborne school in Fort Benning, Georgia. And when you go to airborne school, you're going with kind of the regular Army guys. And so you're just coming out of this hardcore training. You're in incredible physical condition. And you're going, now you're kind of stepping it down to go through this Army training, which makes you feel like you can do anything because they're going on 3-mile runs. You're used to going on 14-mile runs. So I get done with that airborne school, think I'm awesome. And I show up at SEAL Team 1, check in with the Master Chief. And the Master Chief, the first thing he says to us is, hey, everyone here has been through BUDS and no one cares. It doesn't mean anything. What you need to do now that you're here is you need to prove yourself. You need to be on time. Don't forget anything. Keep your mouth shut, keep your ears open, and do what you're supposed to do. Okay, that's what we got told. Basically, be prepared, be disciplined, do what you're supposed to do. Do what you're supposed to do. To me, the way that translated to me was that translates into discipline. What is discipline? People talk about motivation all the time. Oh, how can I get motivated? How can I stay motivated? I don't care about motivation. Motivation doesn't mean anything to me. Motivation to me is just an emotion. It's an emotion that goes up and down. It's emotion like being happy or being sad, being angry. It's just an emotion and it comes and goes. And so you can't count on it. It's too fickle. Motivation is too fickle. You have to count on discipline. You have to do what you're supposed to do regardless of how you feel. Now, what I found was, of course, like I said earlier, I wasn't the strongest guy, I wasn't the smartest guy, I wasn't the fastest guy. So what I had to do was I had to work hard. I had to be disciplined. I had to be disciplined. And what I found was the harder I worked and the more disciplined that I was, the more freedom I got. And this is strange. This is a strange thing to think about because everyone wants freedom, right? Everybody wants freedom. We all want freedom in everything that we do. And what's interesting is if you really want freedom, the way you get freedom is through discipline. You have to be disciplined in order to get freedom. So here's an example. Classic example. No one can argue with this example. Financial freedom, right? Financial freedom. Everybody wants financial freedom. Of course, we want money. But here's the difference. Here's the thing. Here's the key. If you want financial freedom, in order to have financial freedom, you have to have financial discipline. You have to work hard. You have to work overtime. You have to save your money. You have to invest your money properly. You can't waste your money on stupid things that you don't even actually need. And if you have that kind of financial discipline, you will end up with financial freedom. So that's one example. Another example is time. We all want time. We all want more free time. Well, how do you get more free time? You get more free time by having more disciplined time management, by making a schedule, by sticking to that schedule, by waking up earlier in the morning, by not wasting time on things that provide you no benefit whatsoever. And if you have that kind of discipline with your time, if you have that kind of disciplined time management, you will end up with more free time. So that's what you need to think about every day. You're not going to wake up every day and be motivated. You can't count on that. But you can wake up every day and be disciplined and do what you are supposed to do. Now, when I'd been at SEAL Team 1 for a little while, there was an opportunity. There was a program in the SEAL teams. I was an enlisted guy, meaning I was one of the frontline troopers. Well, there was an opportunity where I had to apply to become an officer, to move up into a leadership position. And it was a very selective program. They picked every year 50 sailors from the Navy out of 250,000 people in the Navy and out of about 5,000 applicants for this program. So I put my application together. I submitted it, kept my fingers crossed, waited a few months, and got back the results. And the results were negative. I didn't get picked up. Okay. So what did I do? Sure, I could have blamed, the people that were on the selection board. I could have blamed that, hey, it wasn't fair the way they set it up. But I didn't do that. What I did was I looked at myself and said, okay, what can I do better? What can I do different? What things am I lacking in my application that I can actually work towards so next year when I put in this application, I can get selected? What can I do to make that happen? And that's exactly what I did. I worked harder. I got some more qualifications. I went to some more schools. I moved into some leadership positions as an enlisted guy. I took ownership, worked harder, put in the application the next year, and I got picked up. So now I moved up into a leadership position. And once I was in a leadership position, well, now I started leading operations. And a few years later, September 11th happened, and I was now a platoon commander in Baghdad. And I wanted to tell you all about one particular operation that I did in Baghdad. Now, many of the operations that we did in Baghdad, in and around Baghdad, these were capture kill operations. And what that meant was we would gather intelligence from various sources, and then we would, with that information, figure out where a bad guy was located. Once we knew that where that bad guy was located, well, then what we do is load up our Humvees in the middle of the night, 1 o'clock in the morning. We would drive to the general vicinity to where that bad guy was located. Once we were a couple blocks away, we'd stop our vehicles because they were big diesel engines and they made a bunch of noise. We'd get out of our Humvees and we'd foot patrol the last couple blocks to where that bad guy was located. Once we were at the building where the bad guy was, well, just about every building in Iraq has like a 6 to 8 foot wall around it. So we built little ladders out of 2x4s, and we put those ladders up against the wall, and we'd climb over inside the compound, and we'd walk up to the door of the compound, and we put a big giant explosive breaching charge on the door. Once we had that explosive breaching charge on the door, we'd take a step back, we'd blast the door open, we'd go in there, we'd grab the bad guys, we'd search for any contraband or any intelligence that we could gather. We'd bring the bad guys back to our base. We'd then interrogate the bad guys. We would find out where their friends were, and then we'd go get their friends. And it was an awesome experience. I mean, we did operation after operation after operation, capturing or killing these bad guys. But there was one particular operation that we did that was a little bit different. And it was an approach that we took called a low visibility approach, meaning instead of going in Humvees, and kicking in the door, well, this particular operation, we were going after a financier of the insurgents who was in a hotel in downtown Baghdad. And this hotel that he was in was the same hotel where a bunch of Western journalists and contractors were staying. So this was almost like a normal hotel. And we get word that this bad guy is in this normal hotel where there's Americans, there's CNNs in there, and the various reporters, the AP press reporters, they're all in there. And then all the contractors, the American contractors that are there working, all in this normal hotel. So we figured if we roll in there with Humvees and with our uniforms on and weapons at the ready, we're going to draw a lot of attention, and he's going to have a chance to get out of there. So we took a different approach. And what we did was we basically put on our civilian clothes, and, we carried some concealed weapons, and we rolled down into that hotel, acting normal. Matter of fact, I think we were driving some Toyota Hiluxes, which I know you all know are very popular and very near and dear to the heart of many American servicemen that served overseas because they're such a durable and reliable vehicle. So we get to the hotel, we're acting normal. We roll in, we use the old trick that you use when you're a high school kid. You just kind of act like you know what you're doing and people let you do it. So we walked right in through the lobby. We walked to the elevator. We actually knew which floor we knew what room, we knew his room number. We knew exactly where he was. We all walk in normal. We get in the elevator. We go up we press his floor number. We're all standing there. We get up to that floor. The doors open up. Walk down. We see his room number. I had an interpreter with me. We knock on his door. My interpreter says, "Hey, room service." or whatever the term is in Arabic. And the guy was suspicious because it's 1 o'clock in the morning or whatever. And he says, who is it? And he goes, it's room service. We have something for you. And the guy wouldn't open the door. So we kick the door open. We get inside. We grab this guy. We cuff him up. We search his room. He's got a bunch of American money on him. He's got a bunch of cell phones on him. So now we got to get him out of there. So what we do is we decided before the operation that once we did the hit on that room, we didn't want to use the elevator to get back down because then we don't know what we're walking into. So we decided on our way back down, we were going to take the stairwell back down. So we're walking down this stairwell. I'm actually walking point. There's 4 of my guys behind me there, and one of them is holding this prisoner, and we've got him cuffed up, but we're just letting him walk down the stairs. And as I'm walking down the stairs, they're the flights of stairs that turn back on each other with a level each floor. And as I'm walking down the stairs, all of a sudden, from around the corner, I hear a noise that I knew exactly what this sound was because I had heard it over and over again. And it was the sound of an MP5, a Heckler & Koch MP5 submachine gun, bolt going home, getting ready to shoot. And I hear this, and right as I hear it, I see this MP5 staring. I'm staring in the barrel of an MP5, and the person that's holding the weapon is one of the security guards from the hotel. He has no idea what's happening. We didn't deconflict with the security guards. We figured they might not be the best people to tell what we were going to do. But here's this guy. He has no idea what's happening. For all he knows, we could be kidnapping this guy, and he is holding an MP5 straight at my chest. His eyes are about this big, and he's got white knuckled fingers, and I can see his finger on the trigger, and I can see his knuckle is turning white because he's starting to take the slack out of the trigger. And right above me, pointing a gun at his head, is one of my guys who has seen what's happening, who now has pulled out his weapon, and I'm standing there. This is going to be a terrible situation. Terrible situation. So what did I do? Well, number one is luckily I had control over my emotions. I didn't freak out. I didn't panic. What I did was I just slowly, I knew very little Arabic, but there's a term shway shway, which in Arabic means calm down. So I said, shway shway, calm down. And I slowly reached inside my shirt and I pulled out my American military ID, which also had a big American flag next to it. And I told my interpreter, I said, tell him that we're Americans, tell him that we have a terrorist, and tell him that we're going to leave now. So my interpreter did his job, and the security guards very hesitantly put their weapons down and let us go. But my point in telling that story is that we have to remain calm, and we can't let our emotions run our decision-making process. You have to take a step back, stay detached, don't panic, keep your cool at all times. Now, I got done with that deployment where I was in charge of 1 SEAL platoon and spent most of my time in Baghdad. When I got back to America, I took over 2 SEAL platoons. And when I took over 2 SEAL platoons combined together is called a task unit. And my task unit was called Task Unit Bruiser. And we deployed to a place in Iraq called Ramadi. And this was 2006 is when we deployed. And if you remember this time frame, 2005, 2006, if you watch the news during that time frame, you probably remember them saying on the news just about every night that there was 2 soldiers killed in Al-Anbar province or 3 Marines killed in Al-Anbar province. Well, the capital of Al-Anbar province is this city of Ramadi. And the vast majority of the casualties that took place in Al-Anbar province took place in this capital city of Ramadi. Now, when we got there, we were doing a much different type of mission. My first deployment to Iraq, to Baghdad, I already described what we were doing, going out, grabbing bad guys in the middle of the night. We had a massive tactical advantage doing night operations. We have night visions. We have infrared lasers on our weapons. The enemy didn't have any of that. So we had a massive tactical advantage. Most of the time, when we would get to the bad guys on those capture kill operations, the bad guys would be still laying in bed. They'd be awake, but we would catch them in bed. They would not be prepared for us. They were disorganized sort of thugs that had been running around causing problems. Well, when we got to Ramadi, things were a lot different. Things were a lot different in the city of Ramadi. The fighting there was extremely violent. The enemy was well organized, and the enemy had turned from a bunch of thugs that were running around causing problems to an organized insurgency that were working together. And the types of missions that we were doing out there was working alongside Iraqi soldiers and American soldiers and American Marines to clear through the entire city, street to street, building to building. That's what we were doing. And the fighting was extremely heavy. And we did a great job of taking the fight to the enemy. And we were very efficient in the way we executed our operations, going into enemy, sneaking into enemy controlled areas, setting up what we called sniper overwatch positions. Once we were in these sniper overwatch positions, the enemy would start to maneuver around in the streets trying to go after coalition forces. They wouldn't know where we were. And so when they would sneak around with their RPGs and their machine guns, my sniper teams could easily engage them and take them out. And we were very efficient at doing this. But the enemy gets a vote. And, well, the enemy was determined. And the enemy, they have no rules of engagement. They can do whatever they want out there. They don't care who they hurt. They don't care who they kill. They don't care if they kill civilians, women, children. They don't care about anything like that. So the enemy's going to get a vote. And on August 2nd, 2006, they killed one of my guys, Mark Lee. Mark Lee, who was an awesome guy, an unbelievably gregarious and funny and strong and fast and smart. And he got shot. He got shot and killed. He was killed immediately when he was shot. He was entering a building. There was enemy fire. He stepped into the line of fire to try and protect his teammates, and he was shot. He was hit. And he was the first SEAL that was killed in Iraq. And, you know, up to that point, let's face it, we felt invincible. You know, we'd been out there dodging bullets for 3 months at this point. We'd had a couple guys wounded, but no one killed. So we felt like we were invincible. And when Mark got killed, it was absolutely soul crushing. And as the leader of the task unit, it was my responsibility to figure out what to do next. How do we get through this? Because listen, the SEALs hadn't been in this kind of sustained combat since Vietnam. And no one in my chain of command had ever had to deal with losing one of their guys in combat. In fact, when we were getting ready to deploy to Ramadi, we never even talked about, you know, what we would do if someone gets killed, how you handle it. Look, there was a protocol that you follow as far as the notification of the family and all those things. There's a protocol for that. But as far as how to handle a bunch of SEALs that just lost one of their best friends, how do you handle that? How do you get through that pain? And how do you lead your team through that kind of loss? And there was no one for me to ask what to do. So I had to kind of figure it out. And so what we did was we stood down from operations for a day. We took Mark and put him on his angel flight to head back to America. We had a celebration of Mark's life, and we mourned his loss. And then I got the task unit back together. And I said, what we are going to do now is we are going to get our gear back on. We are going to lock and load our weapons, and we are going to go out and do what we are supposed to do, what Mark would have wanted us to do. We are going to go out and execute our missions. And that's exactly what we did. That's exactly what we did. And you know, this attitude of doing what you're supposed to do and taking ownership of what's happening, this is something that was placed into my mind over my times in the SEAL teams by different individuals that I work with or different individuals that I saw. And I remember one moment that had a huge impact on me. I was a young SEAL. I had just checked into the SEAL team, and there was a SEAL platoon that was getting ready to go out on a training operation. And the Master Chief told me, hey, go in there and watch the briefing that they're giving before they go out on their operation, just so you understand what it's like to sit through a SEAL team, a SEAL platoon briefing. And so I said, okay, yeah, roger that, Master Chief. So I go into this briefing room. And I go into this briefing room, and there's a SEAL platoon that's getting ready to conduct a training operation. And there's the commanding officer of the SEAL team is there. The executive officer of the SEAL team is there. The training officer. So there's a bunch of people besides the platoon that are just observing the briefing to figure out, you know, to listen to and give guidance to this young SEAL platoon leader on his briefing and see how he does. So I'm sitting there, and they go through the brief, and it was an over the beach operation. So they were going to bring boats into the beach, and then they were going to bring the boats onto the beach, and then they were going to go on a patrol, and they were going to hit a target somewhere. And so they go through the brief of how they're going to do this operation. And they get done with the brief, and the commanding officer, so this is the guy that's in charge of all of SEAL Team 1, he says, okay, let me ask you a question. What are you going to do when you launch on this operation and you got 4 boats? What are you going to do if one of the boats breaks down? And the officer says, well, you know, boss, if one of the boats breaks down, situation will dictate, and I'll make a call on what we're going to do. And the commanding officer says, okay. He says, what are you going to do if once you get to the beach, you get compromised or there's an enemy and they see you? And the young officer says, well, you know, if the enemy sees us and we feel like we're compromised, situation dictates, I'll figure out what to do. The commanding officer says, okay. And he says, okay, well, what if now once you're on the land and now you're walking to the target, what if you get compromised then? What if the enemy sees you as you're approaching the target? What are you going to do? And the young officer says again, well, you know, boss, the situation will dictate, and I'll make a decision. And at this point, they're the executive officer of the SEAL team. And I haven't talked about him yet. This guy, there's a picture on the internet of SEALs in Vietnam, and it's called the Dirty Dozen. And it's a picture of a bunch of SEALs, and they're all in their camouflage uniform. They got their faces painted green, and they're holding up a Viet Cong flag. And it's called the Dirty Dozen, that picture. And one of the people in that picture was my executive officer. So this was kind of a legendary SEAL who everybody respected. But he didn't talk a lot. He didn't say very much. So we're sitting in this brief, and 3-4 times this young SEAL officer says, hey, boss, the situation will dictate what we do. And finally, the executive officer speaks up. And he says, hey, boy. And right then we all knew we better listen to what he's about to say. He says, hey, boy, I keep hearing you say that the situation's going to dictate, the situation's going to dictate, the situation's going to dictate. Well, let me tell you something. We don't work like that. That is unacceptable. We dictate the situation. We decide what is going to happen. And that is a statement that I listened to, that I paid attention to. That's the way you need to be. You need to proactively go through life, not react to what's happening. You need to dictate the way things are going to go. Don't allow things to happen to you. Make things happen. And that idea right there, that was the idea that planted the seed in my head of something else that I talk about a lot, and that is the idea of ownership, extreme ownership. Extreme ownership. This is the first book that I wrote about leadership. And yeah, it's aimed at leadership, but guess what? It's aimed at everyone. Whether you're in a leadership position or not. And guess what? If you're alive and you're a human being, you're in a leadership position. You're leading yourself. You're leading your family. You are in a leadership position. When you're working, even if I'm the lowest person in the chain of command, I'm leading my boss. I have to influence my boss. I have to show my boss the right direction to go into. But this idea of extreme ownership, it applies to everyone in everything that you do. And I've worked with military teams and military leaders and civilian teams and civilian leaders. And the separating factor between the winning people and the losing people is this concept, this idea of extreme ownership. And this became crystal clear to me when I was running the training for the West Coast SEAL teams. And the training that I ran for the West Coast SEAL teams, this wasn't the training where you see guys running around with boats on their head. It's not the basic SEAL training that I talked about earlier. This isn't carrying telephone poles around. That's not the training that I ran. When I got home from my last deployment, I took over the tactical training for the West Coast SEAL teams. So I came home from Ramadi and I took over this training. And this training is where SEALs learn to shoot, move, and communicate. It's where they learn to maneuver elements out on the battlefield. And this is the training where SEALs learn the actual skills to be SEALs. And this is where this attitude of ownership really became clear to me. And the reason it became clear is because I would put SEAL platoons through this training. And sometimes I would have a good SEAL platoon, and sometimes I would have a bad SEAL platoon. And the difference between a good SEAL platoon and a bad SEAL platoon boiled down to the attitude of taking ownership. So what's this attitude I'm talking about? This attitude is not blaming anyone else or anything else when something goes wrong. When something goes wrong, you take ownership of that problem and you get it solved. And if you had a platoon that had that attitude, it would do great. If you had a platoon that didn't have that attitude, they would fall apart. Let me tell you what it would look like. So I would have a bad SEAL platoon with a bad SEAL leader coming through my training. And the training that I put together was extremely difficult. It was extremely difficult. All kinds of mayhem going on. We used paintball guns. I had actors and actresses that would come in and role play as civilians. And I had other SEALs that would get dressed up like bad guys. I had special effects going off, explosions going off. We had Hollywood set designers come down and make all the buildings look like they were buildings in Iraq or Afghanistan. So the training was really hard. And I would take a SEAL platoon, in this case, this bad SEAL platoon with this bad SEAL leader, and I'd put them out on one of these training operations, and they would completely fail. And everything would fall apart, and everyone would get shot with paintball, and they wouldn't accomplish the mission. And I would bring them back to base, and I would bring them into the debriefing room, and I would bring the platoon commander to the front of the room, and I'd say, all right, Lieutenant, that was horrible. what went wrong out there. And the bad SEAL leader would stand up and say, I'll tell you what went wrong. First of all, the assault team leader over there, you didn't bring enough people for that operation. You didn't do a good target study. You didn't see how big that target was, so you didn't bring enough people. That means it took you forever to get through the target, and that bogged us down. You need to figure out how to do your job. And then the mobility commander, you in charge of the Humvees, in charge of picking us up, you didn't even know where to come pick us up. That's the only piece of information that you needed, and you didn't have it. That's embarrassing. You better get a grip on reality. And then the sniper team leader, you never told me where you were. You never reported your position to me. That caused all kinds of confusion. So you better figure out how to do your job. You better get a grip on reality, and you better square yourself away. And I'd be sitting there listening to that debrief. And of course, there's something very interesting about that debrief. What's interesting about that debrief is none of it was the leader's fault. None of it was the leader's fault. It was your fault. It was your fault. It was your fault. And here's what happens. When that leader points his finger and starts blaming someone else for something going wrong, guess what happens? The people that are getting blamed, you know what they do? They get defensive. And then they point their finger at someone else. And then that person points their finger at someone else. And what you end up with is a team where everyone on the team is pointing their fingers at each other. Everyone is blaming each other for the problems, and the problems do not get solved. And that team is never going to improve. Now, you compare that with a good SEAL platoon that has a good SEAL leader. And I'd have one of those good SEAL leaders and good SEAL platoons coming through my training, and I would send them out on a training exercise, and it would be just as hard. And guess what? They would do just as bad. And everyone would get shot with paintball, and they would fail their mission. And I'd bring them back to the debriefing room, and I'd bring that platoon leader up to the front of the room, and I'd say, okay, Lieutenant, that was absolutely pathetic. What happened? And the good SEAL leader would stand up and say, okay, let me tell you what I saw from my perspective. First of all, the assault team leader, I didn't give you the people you needed. I should have done a target study with you and made sure you understood how big that target was, and to make sure you had enough people. Next time I will get with you and make sure I give you enough people. Now, the mobility commander in charge of the Humvees, in charge of picking us up, somehow you didn't know where to come pick us up. Somehow you came to my brief that I'm responsible for, and I failed as a leader to convey to you the one piece of information that you actually needed. That is my fault. And next time I will get with you face to face after the brief to confirm you know exactly where to pick us up. And then the sniper team leader, I lost track of where you were. That's probably my most important job as a leader, is to know where all my troops were, and I didn't know where you and your team were. Next time, I'm going to put more points on the map for you to check in with me so I know exactly where you are all the time. So those are the things I'm going to change for the next operation so that we can do a better job. Now you can see this is a totally different debrief. And you might think to yourself that now the team, they're going to point their finger back at me and they're going to say, you're damn right, Jocko, this is all your fault. But they don't do that. They don't do that. Instead, the assault team leader says, boss, you know what? You got a lot of stuff on your plate. I'm in charge of the assault. I rounded down the number of people I thought I was going to need. I will never make that mistake again. You don't have to worry about me. I got this. And then the mobility commander says, hey, boss, there's only one piece of information that I needed to conduct this operation, and I didn't have it. Not only did I not have it, no one on my team had it. That is absolutely not your fault. That is my fault. I will not let it happen again. You don't have to hold my hand. I will fix the problem. And then the sniper team leader says, hey, boss, the reason you didn't know where I was is because I didn't know where I was. I got lost. I got my whole team lost. I didn't do a good job with navigation. Next time, I will plot a better course. I will use my GPS and back it up with a triangulation so I know exactly where I am, and I will report my position to you. You don't have to babysit me. And now you can see what we end up with is a team where everyone on the team takes ownership of the problems. And when everyone on the team takes ownership of the problems get solved. And that team is going to improve every single time they do an operation. Whether they are successful or not, it doesn't matter. They are going to get better. And that applies to everyone. And it applies to us as individuals. How we handle what's going on when things don't go the way we want them to go. Things don't go the way you want them to go. Sure, you can say, oh, the market's gone bad. The client was bad. The pricing, well, you can blame all those different things. And guess what? You can't change the client. You can't change the pricing. You can't change the market. Those things are what they are. What you can take ownership of is how you handle those things. That's what you have to do. That's what will make you successful. You take ownership of your mission. You take ownership of your business. You take ownership of your clients. You take ownership of your future. And you take ownership of your life. And then you lead. You lead yourself. You lead your team. You lead your family. You lead yourself and you people you know. You lead them all to victory. And with that, Joe, that's my message to the troops. I know we're going to do some Q&A here with Scott. If we had any questions, roll in.
Thanks, Jocko. We did have a handful of questions come in. So first question for you is from Mike Ambler in Indiana. This question is, in spending 20 plus years in the car business, I believe it's safe to assume that all successful stores, or any business for that matter, have great leadership. If you could build a leader, what 2 traits above all others would you give them? And more importantly, how would you recommend they cultivate these traits and ultimately have them teach these traits to the other people they're in charge of?
So this is a question I get asked all the time. And and it's a pretty easy question for me to answer, actually, because when I was running that West Coast SEAL training, it was a leadership laboratory, and I got to see leaders basically every night of the week. I got to see a SEAL leader in charge of a SEAL platoon, make decisions. And you know, I told that story about the SEAL leaders, the good SEAL leader and the bad SEAL leader. And I said the bad platoon. Well, guess what? When you have a bad platoon, when you have a bad leader, you're going to end up with a bad platoon. When you got someone that's blaming everyone else, you're going to end up with a bad platoon. When you got someone that's going to take ownership, you're going to end up with a good platoon. That culture will go through the whole organization. But one thing that I saw when it comes to characteristics of good leaders versus bad leaders, the most important characteristic for a leader to have is humility. It's humility. And the reason for that, and the reason that I know that is because when we would fire a SEAL leader, when we would remove a SEAL leader from their leadership position, and sometimes these guys have been in the SEAL teams for 5, 10, 15 years, when we would remove them from their position of leadership and fire them, the reason we would be firing them wasn't because they didn't know how to shoot their gun. It wasn't because they didn't know how to read a map. It wasn't because they weren't in good physical condition. We would fire SEAL leaders because they lacked humility. Because think about what it does to your brain. Think about what it does to your mindset when you lack humility. When you lack humility, you don't listen to anybody else. You don't take any input from anyone else. When you lack humility, you underestimate your enemy. You underestimate your competitor. And when you underestimate your competitor, you don't plan and you don't prepare and you cut corners. And when you cut corners and you don't plan and you don't prepare, that's when you get caught. And the worst thing about somebody that lacks humility is that they can't even look in the mirror and do a good, honest assessment of themselves to see where they can improve. They already think they're perfect. So that's the one type of person that can't really become a good leader. It's someone who has an ego that's out of control. Now, the other thing I would say on this, they asked for two characteristics. The second characteristic that I believe is most important is balance, is to be balanced. Now, listen, going to the extremes as a leader is never good. It's never good. It's never good to go to extremes as a leader. Let me think of a good example. Very simple. Here's a very simple example. A leader has to talk. A leader has to communicate, right? A leader absolutely has to talk and has to communicate. But is it possible for a leader to communicate too much? Well, yes, it is. If you've ever had a leader that sent you 47 emails before 5 o'clock in the morning, maybe they're communicating too much because now you don't know what's important. You can't even read all those emails. So that's communicating too much. But is it possible for a leader to communicate too little? It is absolutely possible for a leader to communicate too little. And now the team doesn't know what's happening. They don't know what direction we're going in. So where do you want to be? You want to be balanced. You want to be in the middle. You know, I talk a lot about keeping your emotions in check. I talked about that today. Hey, you got to keep your control of your emotions. Does that mean you want to have no emotions? No, because if you're in a leadership and you have no emotions, you're not going to connect with anyone. You can't connect and you don't have relationships with your team. That's a failing team. The other end of the spectrum is, what if you make all your decisions based on your emotions? That's not good either. So where do you want to be? You want to be balanced. So those are the two most important characteristics that you have to be in a leadership position: humility and balance. And I think the way that you start those cultures inside of an organization is you live them. You live them. And when people don't live them, then you try and model it for them so that they can see the correct way to act. I was very lucky. You know, I learned as much from the bad officers I worked from as I did from the good officers I worked from. When I had a bad officer and no one wanted to follow that officer, I'd be thinking to myself, what is that officer doing that's making us not want to follow him? What is it? And I would identify those things and I would learn and I would make sure I wouldn't utilize those behaviors. I would also look at the good officers that I have, the good leaders that I have. And I'd say, what is it that's making me want to follow him? I want to follow him. I didn't want to follow him. What's the difference? I emulate the qualities I want and I reject the qualities I didn't want. So that's what I would say we have to do. Stay humble, be balanced, model those behaviors.
Thanks, Jocko.
No
Our
problem.
next question comes from Daniel Bartram over in Indiana. How have you kept your ego in check to remain a humble leader after having such great success in the military and in business?
Well, first of all, I can tell you that there's plenty of people around me to keep me humble. And also, I think the most humbling thing that a person can experience, well, let me rephrase that. The most humbling thing that I have experienced is combat. It's combat. And when you're in combat, you can do everything right. You can be the best trained guy. You can make the right decision, and you can still lose. You can still take losses. And recognizing that even when you do your best, things can go wrong, that keeps you very, very humble. So for me, you know, like I said earlier, I was never great at anything. And so I think growing up, I was kept pretty humble. But I think when you've been in combat and you recognize how horribly things can go wrong, I think that's a very humbling experience. And you know, look, I just talked about extremes, right? And how it's not good to go to extremes. Well, is it good to be so egotistical that you think you don't have to prepare and you don't think you don't have to plan and you think that that the competitors can't touch you and you don't have to train? Is it good to be there? No, that's horrible. That's egomaniac. The other end of the spectrum, is it down here where, hey, I don't have the confidence, I don't believe in what I'm doing, I don't think I'm capable of this? No, we don't want to be there either. Where do we want to be? We want to be in the middle. We want to be balanced. We want to have enough ego to drive us to try and do a good job, but not so much ego that we think that we don't need to try to do a good job. So just look in the mirror in the morning and recognize that you got some work to do. What else we got? You got any more, Scott?
Yeah, we do. A few more. So the next one's from Chad Castor over in Indiana. How do you stay hungry? You've achieved so much greatness in your career, whether it be military or business. What feeds you to keep moving on to something else where you're starting at the bottom and end up at the top?
Once again, when you've been in combat and you've seen the incredible sacrifices that my friends have made, that the people I work, the Army soldiers and Marines, the U.S. Marines that I worked alongside, when you see the sacrifices that were made and you recognize that every single minute of every single day that we have here is an absolute gift of freedom from someone that sacrificed their life to give us this opportunity, this is a gift. And I will not squander this gift by sitting around and not doing everything I can to leave a mark and make the world a little bit better of a place and help people learn lessons without having to go through what I went through to learn them.
Thank you for that. Next question we have is from Michael Alf here in Illinois. So how do you take extreme ownership of a customer that is not cooperative and even adversarial?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so if I've got someone that's adversarial towards me, what I do is put my ego in check and I try and find some common ground that they're talking to me about. And what am I doing wrong? How am I, this is the thing. If I'm so good, this is another little conversation I had with me when I was a young SEAL. When I was a young SEAL, I thought I was pretty good. We talk about staying humble. This is when I wasn't staying humble. I was sitting there thinking I was pretty good. I should be getting promoted. I should be getting put in charge of stuff. I should be, leading the team. And all of a sudden, a couple of my friends got promoted ahead of me. And I thought, this is ridiculous. I'm a better leader than that person. And then I asked myself, okay, Jocko, if you're so smart, why aren't you winning? If you're so smart, why aren't you winning? So if I'm such a good salesperson, why is it that this client is being adversarial towards me? What am I doing? What approach can I take? How can I get this person to calm down? And you know what a lot of it's going to have to do with? A lot of it's going to have to do with subordinating your own ego. Subordinating your own ego. Okay, you want to yell at me? You know what? You're setting this up wrong. You're giving me the wrong price. Hold on. Maybe I did give you the wrong price. Let me go review this. Right? So take ownership. But that's the whole idea of ownership. And what's very powerful about ownership is that it disarms people. When someone comes and yells at me, hey, Jocko, you're wrong about this. You know what I say? I say, okay, let me understand your position, because if I'm wrong, I want to know about it. Instead of saying, I'm not wrong, you're wrong. Well, now we're not even having a conversation. Now we're having a fight, and I don't want to fight, because if I look from a leadership perspective, from a human perspective, if I'm trying to have a conversation with you, Scott, if I'm trying to persuade you to think a little bit more the way I'm thinking, if I'm yelling at you, what are the chances I'm going to persuade you? The chances are 0. If I'm getting hostile towards you, what are the chances that you're going to say, oh, you know what, Jocko, thank you for yelling at me. Now I understand your viewpoint. That doesn't work. If you want people to listen to you, listen to them. If you want people to respect you, give them some respect. So look, is this going to work? Can you end up with someone that's just a complete, just a savage that just that just wants to be rude to you? That's totally disrespectful to you. Sure, it can happen. And maybe that's a client that you don't want. But that should be very few and far between. Most of the time, look, you guys sell cars. I have two uncles. Both of them are car salesmen, used car salesmen. And I know it's a tough job. And one thing, just like any other situation in life, what we want to do is understand what someone else's perspective might be. When someone's coming in to buy a car, they might already be in a bad frame of mind. Why are they having to buy this car? Did their old car break down? Can they afford it? What can they afford? This is stressing them out. They're already in a bad situation. What kind of day did they have at work? So they're in a stressful situation when they show up. So trying to understand their perspective a little bit, and then someone wants to yell at you, do your best to absorb that. Absorb it. Try and be nice to them back. That's how I take ownership.
Thanks, Jocko. Next question comes from Ryan Alf here in Illinois. Mm-hmm. Hey, Jocko, your kids' book series is superbly popular. With the field manual coming out in the Warrior Kids series, when will the podcast start back up?
That's a good one. I will get some podcasts out for some Warrior Kid podcasts out. I'll definitely get them out when the book comes out. I'll get some podcasts done as well. Kind of do some reviews from the book and talk about it and get back on it. So I know there's a lot of Warrior Kids out there waiting on those podcasts. I apologize. I'm not haven't gotten them out in a while, but yeah, I'll get some out with the launch of the book.
Alrighty. And then we did have one other question just came in on the chat from Dave Sosnowski. Mm-hmm. In the car business, many times you have many different personalities and different levels of discipline. How do you lead all those different personalities?
Well, what you need to do is you need to get to know your people, right? You've got to get to know your people. And that's one of the things that makes leadership so hard. I've got a whole thing that I talk about when I talk with businesses. What is one of the things that makes leadership so hard is you're dealing with people, and people are crazy. So you got to deal with these crazy people, and the craziest person that you got to deal with is yourself. So I explain it like this. It's like being a woodworker, right? If you're a woodworker, if you're a carpenter, you got to know how to use all these different tools, right? You got to learn how to use a draw and a chisel and a saw. You got to learn how to use all these different tools. And then you've got to learn how to use those different tools on different types of wood, because a piece of pine is very different from a piece of oak. One is soft, one is hard. So you got to use those tools a little bit differently on those different types of pieces of wood. And then on top of that, each individual piece of pine is a little bit different. Each individual piece of oak is a little bit different. So that's what you're dealing with when you're dealing with people. So yeah, you got to pay attention to the tools. You got to pay attention to the type of tools you're using. You got to pay attention to how you're using those tools. And then you got to pay attention to the type of wood and that specific piece of wood that you're dealing with. So how do you do all that? It all is founded on you building relationships with people. So you figure out what type of wood they are, so you know which leadership tools you use with them. Now that's important. It's important to remember this. When I say leadership, sometimes people think that leadership is just this thing that you're supposed to know, it's just, hey, I work with people. I'm here on the wire diagram. That makes me a leader. That's not what makes you a leader. Being a leader is understanding the skills that it takes to lead. Just like playing basketball, just like playing guitar, just like playing golf, whatever sport you want to play, there's techniques that you have to learn before you can do it effectively. And it's the same thing with leadership. I wrote a whole book about this called Leadership Strategy and Tactics. What you actually do in certain situations to deal with different people with different levels of discipline. If I've got someone with a low level of discipline, you know what I might do with that person? I might say, hey, you know what, Scott, I'm going to put you in charge of this thing over here. And if you have a certain type of personality, you go, oh, wow, Jocko, trust me, he's put me in charge. You're going to step up your game. There's some people that I might say, oh, you know what? Oh, Scott thinks he can just blow stuff off. I'm going to micromanage him until he goes, can't you just leave me alone? And I'll say, yeah, I'll leave you alone if you do it on your own. And Scott says, yes, I'll do it on my own. Just get off my back. So you've got different tools that you can utilize. And you have to learn those tools, and then you have to apply those tools effectively on people while you match those tools to their personalities.
All right, and then one more question we got in the chat. What kind of routine do you have, and how important is keeping a routine?
Look, keeping a routine to me is very important. My life, right? Everyone has life, and life doesn't always allow you to keep your routine. So what do? I wake up early. I work out every day. You know, I don't usually eat until around 10 or 11 o'clock in the morning. And then what I do during the day is I work, and I always know what I'm doing. I put it on my schedule, so I know what I'm going to be doing throughout the day. I know what projects I'm working on. So I think it's very important. It's part of discipline. When people ask me how to increase their discipline, I say increase your routine. Get up at the same time every day. Go to bed at the same time every day, as much as you possibly can. Stick to a routine. Work out at the same time every day. You know, working out early in the morning, to me, that's the only time that I can totally protect. I can totally protect that time. 98% of the time, I can totally protect 4:30 in the morning. No one else wants to talk to me at 4:30 in the morning. So at the end of the day, if I say, oh, I'll work out tonight, guess what? My kid's going to need help with homework. The water heater's going to break. Someone's going to need a ride. And I'm not going to get to do what I need to do. I'm not going to get to do what I'm supposed to do. So that's going to cost me. So you definitely have to set up a good, solid routine. And I know that's the last question. I just want to look, we're going through some challenging times right now. And I don't wish challenges on anyone. I don't wish combat on anyone. I don't wish war on anyone. Just like I don't wish the challenge like COVID on anyone or on our country or on the world. But I will say this, when we face challenges, these challenges are the things that demand us to be resilient. These challenges are what demand that we adapt and we overcome and we figure things out. These challenges that we face are what make us stronger. And these challenges that we face are what require us to step up and lead. So take ownership. Impose discipline in your world. Do what you are supposed to do and go out there and win. Thanks for having me, everybody. Appreciate it.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Thank you, Jocko, for this amazing panel today. So we really appreciate everything that you had to say. You guys check him out online. Echelon Front is the company that he is working with and has founded, and we'll come to you next week with some more good information in the training front. So thank you, Jocko, and thank you, everyone.
Thanks for having me, everybody. Stay safe out there.